I'm sorry, our camera crew is like, there's hijinks going on, and it's all kinds of goofy fun. All right, so into this festival of immaturity, we will talk to, we will bring Anne on line 2 and see what she has to say about it all. Hello, Anne.
Hi.
Hi, thank you for waiting.
Oh, you're welcome, no problem.
Hey, how you doing?
Good, thanks. How are you?
We're all right.
Good. During the time when you were talking about this slideshow with the march, and you mentioned one of the Christian picket holders who held a sign that said liar, lunatic, or Lord. I was just wondering if you could expand about your, because you sounded like you had heard that before, and so
yeah,
I was just wondering if you could expand on your opinions about that.
That's one of C.S. Lewis's things, and Josh McDowell's brought it up too. The overall idea is, at least as Josh.
Oh, I'm sorry. I probably should have explained that. I've heard it before, so I know what it means. I was wondering if you could. What I'm wondering is your opinion about that theory.
Sure. Okay. Well, I'll give a summary of it for our viewers at home. The idea is that, at least according to Josh McDowell's version, that he calls it the trilemma, which is not a real term, but anyway, the idea is that Jesus, either he was a lunatic, in other words, who but a lunatic would go around saying all of these, calling himself the Son of God, if it weren't true, or he would have been if he wasn't a lunatic, if he wasn't somebody just going around utterly mad, engaging in all these fantasies and pretending to be divine, he was either, if he weren't a lunatic, then either he would have had to have been a liar, somebody who had this malicious agenda in order to deceive people for his own self-aggrandizement, going around masquerading as the Lord, and in other words, deliberately lying, or he really was the Lord. And Josh McDowell argues, well, there's no evidence that Jesus was crazy, and there's certainly no reason to think that Jesus would have lied. Why would he have lied? So the fallback position then is that Jesus would have had to have been Lord, and he argues that that's really the only conclusion that you can conceivably reach. And there's well, among the problems with this, of course, is that first off, we have no reason for, it's entirely possible, that many of the stories that we know from the Gospels were stories that were essentially, I don't want to say concocted, but they were assembled and put together from oral traditions that were passed down, like in subsequent years following Jesus' life, and became embellished and took on a life of their own. Jesus became a mythologized figure. And so what ended up in the Gospels, even if you want to accept as a point of argument, that there might have been a man named Jesus, or Yeshua, or whatever his original name might have been, going around spreading very positive teachings to people, bringing the Jews together. In that regard, there's no reason to think that the stories that have emerged and that we know from the Gospels, such as his resurrection, the miracles that he performed, weren't entirely fictionalized many years after Jesus died. And we know that in those cultures, it's very common in cultures like that for very famous heroic figures to become mythologized. Now, Jesus in the Gospels is portrayed as being very popular. Everyone is supposed to have known who he was. So if there was this messianic figure, or a figure who was just a great spiritual teacher, going around spreading positive teachings and having a great impact upon the community, and his reputation grew as a result. I have a copy of a book called The 12 Caesars by Suetonius. It's this great biography of the 12 Roman emperors from Augustus, starting from Augustus. And in there, he tells stories about the emperors that ended up being spread throughout the populace as a result of their military campaigns. And you hear about how Romans were telling each other of all these amazing, miraculous deeds that the Roman emperors were doing while they were off conquering the Gauls and what have you. Talking about how and a golden eagle flew down from the heavens and landed 3 times around him and laid an egg, and then from the egg came this mighty sword. And these were stories that were spread about these leaders and swallowed with complete credulity by people who heard them. And then they got spread more and more. So it's well known that in these early primitive cultures, if you have a popular figure that the population is rallying around, all kinds of miraculous things are going to be attributed to them. So if it was happening about the Caesars, there's no reason why it wasn't happening about God. So we don't really have any evidence. We don't have any reason to just take the Gospels at face value as historical documents. So And the whole Lord, liar, or lunatic argument does tend to take that as its premise, that, okay, first, accepting the Gospels as being some sort of historical document, what then are the solutions? Either you have, Jesus was crazy, Jesus was a really bad guy going around lying, or he must have been Lord. And so I think that just the whole argument is kind of flawed in its premise.
Okay.
So I hope I didn't ramble on too much.
No, I appreciate you answering.
Sure.
Because I'd only ever heard it from a Christian perspective and someone.
Sure.
So when you mentioned it, because I don't know, I guess I assumed that y'all had never heard that. So,
no, we've been doing this for quite a while. We like to be the kinds of people who, if we're going to critique something, we want to know what we're talking about.
Right.
It's helpful.
Okay.
Well, thank you for your question. Thanks for watching.
You're welcome. And can I just say one more thing?
Sure.
I just want you to know that. Oh no.
No, go ahead.
Well, because I am a Christian, and I just want you to know that there are Christians that watch the show that aren't. I mean, I would never call and just.
Yeah, and we know that, and I'm glad to mention that. Jeff tells stories about these very aggressive, very negative fundamentalists who harangue us, and we know that most, like the Jerry Falwells of the world, don't represent all Christians.
Right.
Yeah.
And
they don't represent nearly most of the Christians.
Yeah, I mean, the intolerant fundamentalist, loudmouths don't represent what most Christians are who they are.
Well, and I firmly believe that in order for me to want to share anything about what I believe, I have to be able to listen to what others believe.
Well,
so I have no problem listening to your beliefs and seeing the value that you see in them and listening to your side. And so.
Well, we appreciate you watching the show, and if you ever have any questions that you want to lob at us, just feel free, all right?
Thanks very much.
Okay, you take care.
Okay, bye-bye.
There's a fourth possibility that McDowell doesn't go into, and that's the possibility that Christ as a person actually never did exist.
Well, sure.
Which, I mean, we can't just assume that he did, because there are no reliable sources or evidence for the existence of Jesus outside of religious sources. I mean, that's
we have. Seems to me we have a bunch of fraudulent relics. Yeah. We have a forged passage or two in Josephus, but still. Again, I am not.
Did, right.
Yeah, I am not. I don't think it is implausible. Excuse me, belch. That's always healthy. Gotta get it out, right? That what became the largest religion in the world might have been rooted in like an actual guy. A lot of atheists, make an issue out of, I don't think Jesus could possibly exist, because, I'm even willing to take, as a point of argument, maybe he did. We still have the
kind of beside the point.
Yeah. How can you possibly prove these supernatural claims?
Well, it's beside the point to a certain point.
Yeah.
But if it's ever shown that he did not exist, I mean
that's pretty important.
Pretty much,
Yeah.
But
Judea was crawling with messiahs, around the
first century.
So.
The Gnostic cults, the mystery cults were popping up everywhere.
Yeah.
I believe that Jesus was probably, this is my personal opinion from what I've read, that Jesus was probably a conglomeration of those leaders of those mystery cults from that Gnostic era of the first century. Yeah. That's just my personal belief.
Yeah, and I've also heard some good arguments that he may have belonged to the Essenes, which were this is a group of like ascetic monks, and who took many different religious influences, but they lived this really isolated monastic life. And we're being asked to take Derek first on line 2. Derek, you're on the air.
Hey, what's up?
Just hanging.
Yeah, hard hearing you between the TV and the phone.
Okay. So what can I do for you?
I had a question for you. You were saying earlier that there was no extra biblical history for even the existence of Jesus.
Well, I don't know of any, but I mean, there might be some. Is there some?
Well, I was just reading a book recently, and there's actually 2 of them. They're very brief. They're like one-liners. One of them is Roman, and one of them, God, what's that guy's name? He was a Jewish historian.
Josephus?
Flavius
Josephus?
Yeah.
Josephus is a fraud.
Yeah.
The Josephus reference is a fraud. It is accepted as a fraud by pretty much all, even biblical scholars.
Yeah. Oh, okay. That one I didn't know. But there was another reference of him in a Roman writer. I mean, there was like one line, and they just called him a sorcerer, which, so. But I mean, there is at least mention of him somewhere else.
But there
is it Cassius? Tacitus. Tacitus. Would it be? Again, I don't think that the existence or non-existence of Jesus as a man is that vital or is that implausible an idea. You know, again, even if we were talking earlier on about this ossuary, even if this ossuary or any sort of evidence, even if we found out tomorrow that we had 100% reliable historical evidence that yes, in fact, you know, Jesus Christ existed as a man, well, then that's fine. All we've proved is that you know, the world's largest religion had a real guy that inspired it. That's not so implausible. But we are no closer to proving any of the supernatural claims. You know, that ossuary, had it been 100% genuine, still wouldn't have proved that Jesus walked on water. It still wouldn't have proved that he fed hundreds of people with a single loaf of bread and a fish. It wouldn't have proved that he raised people from the dead and cured the blind. It wouldn't have proved that he did many of the miraculous things attributed to him. So we'd still be no closer to any evidence of the divine than we are right now. Sure. Even if we find out tomorrow that there was a real flesh and blood guy walking around, which I don't, you know, I'm not closed to that idea. A lot of atheists, it's atheists even debate amongst themselves about how important that is.
I'm not close to the idea. I just don't think, I don't believe Jesus existed as he is represented in the Bible. Even without the supernatural stuff, I don't think he was one individual. There's too many things. For example, you know, everything attributed to Jesus, virgin birth, crucified by the quote-unquote government. All these things are also true of Mithra. They're also true of Osiris. They're true of so-called deities that existed hundreds of years before Christ.
And Mithraism was a very prominent religion in the area when Jesus is said during that said to have been his time.
There are too many similarities between the Jesus myth and the Mithra myth for to claim that Jesus existed, but Mithra didn't. I mean, you can't use evidence for...
And there are other stories of, you know, crucified messianic figures or sacrificed, you know, people who were martyred for their teachings. So there's really nothing all that unusual, you know, especially given the time and the various beliefs that were active at that time. You know, so...
Okay, then how would you explain the explosive growth of Christianity right after this time?
That would be a guy named, well, first start off with a guy named Paul.
Exactly.
You know, I mean, so I mean, he you know, he is, you know, I think probably more a more influential figure in the history of Christianity than Christ himself was, and then I guess it just, you know, it took on a life of its own. It became organized. It became, I think, like so many religions before it, a path to power for various, you know, groups, for people in the priesthood. So I mean, you know, it's not.
It worked out great for Paul.
Yeah, I mean, sure.
A huge part of his life in prison, and you know, he got killed. That's the kind of job you want to get.
Well, I mean, that's certainly not.
Happened to lots of religious martyrs.
Yeah, it's certainly not, you know, the life that I would want. But I mean, you know, I think Paul was definitely a man who saw in this faith a path to, you know, power and influence, and you know, I mean, he got it eventually. I mean, there's no denying that.
Christianity didn't spread that rapidly until Augustine took it as the religion of the Roman Empire.
Well, no, Constantine.
I'm sorry, Constantine, right? Constantine.
But I mean, but for it to have gotten that far, for
gotten that far is an impressive feat for a religion. No one doubts that.
Okay.
So I mean, so it became just organized very, very quickly, and I think that Christianity, I think, became a thing that rallied, you know, the enemies, as it were, of the Roman Empire. I mean, you had the Jews in Judea. They were a province. They were conquered. You know, none of the conquered provinces of the Roman Empire wanted to be conquered provinces, and so. You know, these were things that could just bring sort of a sense of, you know, nationalism, and if you will, you know, just a sense of your own cultural pride to the Jews at the time. Just sort of like, you know, this is the thing that brings us together to, you know, we can fight the Romans finally, or what have you. I mean, it's just, again, I don't know. I don't pretend to be a biblical scholar, so I can't really. I'm just giving you my impressions of it. But just from what I've read, you know, that's. You know, clearly, you know, the church very quickly got some organization behind it. I think there were some extremely influential early Christian writers like Origen, you know, people who were instrumental in getting the religion going. So,
One more quick question, though.
Yeah.
About the building the legend as it went on. Paul, one that you mentioned, he was teaching real soon after that, so most of the people that he was talking to were alive during all this, and they could have very easily found out by talking to the people that were actually there if he was lying or not, if all the stuff was made up, if all of his, things that he accredited to Jesus actually doing were true or not. If he was actually a real person or not. Yeah, so,
and I think that's a good point you bring up, because an example that I always like to refer to is the whole story of the 500, the feeding of the, and what's curious is that we really sort of in that passage in Paul's right, we really only have Paul's word to go with, on the
and 500 people saw Jesus
for verifying this story. And what I think would have gone a long way towards confirming this story and to giving it that much more credibility is, as you say, if there were people around at the time that Paul was starting to do his teaching, that he was writing his epistles and his books, why not go to those people? Let's get their names. Let's find out where they lived. Let's get their story. Let's get their first-hand eyewitness account. And let's put it all together. But instead, whose word do we have to go on about the story of the 500? We have Paul.
Well, he wasn't writing a history book.
Well, true, but 500 other people saw this. Where are their writings?
Yeah.
Now, granted, a lot of them were probably illiterate. That's fine. But still, we have one.
Yeah.
But there were a lot of Jewish writers of the time whose works survived. A lot of them. And none of them say anything about Jesus. None of them at all.
See, Origen never. The reason we know, getting back to the Josephus passage, why one reason that scholars suspect it's a fraud among many, is that Origen, who is one of the most prominent first-century Christian writers, never references it. So if Josephus's passage was like this important a document, why doesn't Origen talk about it? Origen would have been aware of it.
And Origen talks about Josephus. It's not like he wasn't aware of Josephus at all.
Yeah. So it's tricky. It's tricky getting to the historical Jesus. Yeah. But again, I'll say to me that's not so much a crucial bedrock issue. I mean, for me, I'm just interested in, are the supernatural claims true? If they're not true, I'm going to continue to be an atheist. I don't have any problem with the idea that there may have been an actual messianic figure who either was the original Jesus or who was the guy who inspired the character who became Jesus in the Bible or what have you. I don't think that's really the bedrock issue.
Oh, now you listen here. He's not the Messiah. He's a very naughty boy. Go away.
So anyway, hey, listen, we appreciate your call, but we want to go ahead and get to another couple guys, okay?
Hey, no problem. Thanks.
Thank you.
Take care.
Thanks, Sean.
Yeah.